Yu-Gi-Oh can be a pretty complicated game at times, but if you stick with it, you're gonna have a ton of fun and it can be very rewarding. Now obviously there are a ton of barriers to entry just like in any card game. Obviously price and accessibility are the two main ones. But one of the other biggest barriers to entry that I see all the time are going to be what decks are best to play for beginners. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you a list of the top 5 Yu-Gi-Oh decks for beginners and explain to you why you should be playing this deck if you're new to the game. But before I do that, what actually makes a deck good for beginner players? Well, it has to be a deck that's pretty easy to learn the basics for. The deck can't be too complicated. If it's too complicated, it'll disincentivize players from wanting to stick around and playing the game more often. If the gameplay is simpler, there will be fewer mistakes, which means there'll be higher player retention. But a deck shouldn't just be simple. In my opinion, it should have still a high skill ceiling. Now that might contradict what I've been saying before, but a deck should be, in my opinion, easy to learn but difficult to master. At its core, Yu-Gi-Oh should be fun and make you actually want to play the game. So I find that when a deck has multiple things going for it and new things to learn in a strategy, it actually makes me want to play Yu-Gi-Oh even more. But Yu-Gi-Oh decks should also have multiple lines of play as well as multiple ways to disrupt the opponent in different ways. There are so many different ways to interact with your opponent both on your turn and on their turn. And there's a pretty fine line in terms of overwhelming a new player with all the different types of interaction and showcasing all the diversity of different ways to play the game. For example, Monster Mash decks aren't really what I would consider as being a great option for players who are new to the game. There should be a good mix of monster, spell, and trap cards for new players to learn what is the most effective way to disrupt an opponent's play. And finally, a good deck for new players can't be a toxic strategy. Now this might be a little bit controversial, but I would definitely not recommend giving a new player Stun or even Tenpai Dragon for example, because those decks don't support learning the game itself. Sure, every once in a while it's fun to turn off your brain and still get some easy wins, but for new players that's really not going to be the case. If you're a new player, you have to learn what the cards do. And if you're just going to sit back and watch your opponent go through their combo and not really care about when to interrupt them and just say, you know what, I'll slap down a board breaker and then win the game with an OTK tool or just set up a floodgate, you're not going to learn anything and you're not going to want to stick with the game long term. Now those are the 4 characteristics that I believe every good deck for beginners should have. But there are obviously going to be many other possible characteristics, so let me know down in the comments. And while you're down there, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. But with that being said, here are the top 5 Yu-Gi-Oh decks for beginners. Let's jump into it. Starting off at number 5, we have Vanquish Soul, which is also known as Versus because of the acronym being VS, and it's a very interesting strategy that is kind of based on these old school fighting games. The deck is relatively simple to learn and has a ton of different cards that enable a nice 1-card combo. Now all these combos are really low to the ground and very straightforward, but the deck is definitely more of a control style gameplay than a combo and aggressive style one. It's a deck where timing your interactions is super important as well as maintaining a high level of cards in hand to reveal for your Vanquish Soul monster effects. And by playing Vanquish Soul, you're going to learn how to most effectively use your resources at any given time. The engine itself is very small, which is going to be a common trend you see among all the decks in my top 5. But because the engine is so small, it allows you to play a ton of non-engine or defensive cards, which we usually classify into one of 2 ways. The first of which is going to be as hand traps. These are cards that can interrupt the opponent either on their turn or on your turn and are usually hidden in the hand. And finally, there's going to be board breakers, which is just like the name would suggest, they're used to break down the opponent's end board. Some of the main cards in the deck are Vanquish Soul Raisin, which is your main playmaker in the deck, Vanquish Soul Heavy Borger, which keeps drawing you cards, Caesar Valius, which is a disruption on a huge body, and Vanquish Soul Snow Devil, which is another interruption, but this time in the form of a trap card. The extra deck is really only used as a toolbox to get you out of some tricky scenarios or to OTK. Unlike for other decks where the extra deck is used to keep comboing off, that's not really the case when it comes to Vanquish Soul. Usually Vanquish Soul is going to win games by out-grinding and out-resourcing the opponent with all the card advantage it can accrue. And the good news for Vanquish Soul players, and if you want to pilot this deck, is that it's going to be getting new support in the coming months. It's a very fun, interactive deck with a high skill ceiling at a low cost, and that's why I believe it's a great option for new players. Moving on to our number 4 deck, we have Sky Striker, also known as just Striker. Now, Striker was one of the best decks in the game from its release in 2018 up until 2020, and since then it's had various levels of success depending on the meta, but has still been consistently playable. The archetype focuses on Sky Striker Ace Ray, which is the main deck monster of the strategy, and the gimmick is that Ray is essentially changing her suit of armor to accommodate for different situations that also gain her powerful effects. For example, they can add cards from grave to hand, attack directly, and whatnot. Each of the different suits of armor essentially corresponds to a different Link monster in the extra deck, and because of that, it's definitely a Link-focused strategy. But that's not all it does. The vast majority of cards in the archetype are going to be the Sky Striker spell cards, which there are a ton of. And because of that, the deck plays so many different spell cards because all the striker spells get extra pieces of advantage when you have 3 or more spell cards in your graveyard. And on top of that, they all lack one of the most important restrictions when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's going to be the once per turn. And that means that all these striker spells can be activated multiple times per turn as long as they meet their activation condition. Striker is definitely another control deck, and in my opinion, even more control heavy than Vanquish Soul is, but the deck is one of the most popular decks of all time. It's constantly getting new support every year, including new support that should be coming out in just a couple of months. And if you're considering playing this deck, you're in luck because there are so many communities that are just dedicated to making Striker as good as possible. Some of the main cards in this strategy include, of course, Sky Striker Ace Ray, which is the main monster of the deck, Sky Striker Ace Kagari, which recycles your Sky Striker spells from graveyard to hand so you can activate them again, Sky Striker Ace Shizuku, which gets you your missing striker spells from deck to hand. There's also Sky Striker Mobilize Engage, which is the best card in the deck. It searches for any striker card and even draws you a card as well. It's very possible you can use this card 2, 3, even more times than that in a single turn. And of course, there's also Sky Striker Mecha Widow Anchor, which is the main interruption in the deck. It negates a monster and can even take control of them too. Sky Striker cards are also commonly used as an engine in other strategies because of their flexibility, power, and their consistency. It's a great deck and very simple to play, but as you play it more and more, you're going to reveal new layers that will make the deck even better. My number 3 beginner Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck is going to be Unchained. Now, Unchained is basically split up between the humans and the dogs, which basically they work together to create one of the most powerful and recursive advantage loops in the entire game. The main gimmick is that the Unchained cards destroy other Unchained cards to be able to get extra cards in your hand, field, and even cards that are going to be used as disruption. And if the opponent destroys them, that's just as good because it still does all of that for you. The end board is very sticky and it's extremely difficult to actually break the advantage loop that they can create. On top of that, they're all Fiend type monsters, so they get access to all these really powerful generic Fiend support options in the game. This is the first deck that I'm showing today that I would argue is definitely much more combo than it is control. And it's okay, if you prefer that style of play, the combos aren't too complicated. Their interruptions are also extremely diversified. For example, they can destroy cards with monsters and back row. They also have ways to link summon with the opponent's monsters, which is one of the most unique forms of disruption in the game. The main Unchained cards are going to be Unchained Soul of Sharvara, which does everything for the deck. It destroys cards, it helps you dodge problematic effects, and it even accesses any of your spell and trap cards from the deck. Unchained Soul of Rage is the card that allows you to use your opponent's monsters to link summon during their turn, while Unchained Soul Lord of Yama can search for basically the whole deck and acts as more follow-up if your board gets broken. And there's also the 2 Unchained traps being Chamber and Escape. These 2 are both excellent and can be used either as a Monster Reborn or as a way to pop both your and your opponent's cards. It wasn't long ago where Unchained was the best deck of the format, and while it's not expected to get any future support in the near future, the deck is still very good and does have other ways where you can improve the strategy. For example, you can add cards like the Fiendsmith engine, which will raise the ceiling significantly. Or if you really want to, you can even modify the deck to make it become more of a Yubel strategy than an Unchained deck. Now that deck is a lot more complicated and I don't recommend it for beginners, but it's a great choice where you can eventually take a core of a really solid deck in Unchained and modify it into a more meta-friendly, more competitive deck. Now number 2 should make a lot of old school or anime fans very happy because our number 2 deck is none other than Blue Eyes White Dragon. Yes, that card from the anime is still one of the better decks that you can play as a new player in the game today and one of the better decks in the game overall. Blue Eyes is a great choice for new beginners because it's just a good and simple deck, but also because it recently received a structure deck, which means it has a ton of new cards that are available in this sealed product that are easy to pick up at a low cost. And because Blue Eyes is a fan favorite and anime deck, there are a ton of different support cards for the Blue Eyes archetype, but you can also pair Blue Eyes with a ton of different engines as well. For example, you can play Primite Blue Eyes, which uses the Primite cards for extra starters and to gain card advantage. Invoked Blue Eyes and Red Eyes Blue Eyes also give the deck another starter, but also give the deck another negate with Invoked Mechaba and Red Eyes Black Full Metal Dragon. There's also Bestial Control Blue Eyes, which is a really fun control deck that is a lot slower than the other ones I've mentioned. And there's tons of other options as well. Pure Blue Eyes is also very viable and incredibly cheap. Just picking up 3 copies of the Blue Eyes structure deck is going to be like $30, and you can play a powerful, consistent, and competitive deck right out of the box. But the Primite version I mentioned earlier is definitely the best of the bunch, and it's not even that close. But it's a lot more expensive because of that too. The deck can play in any way you really want it to, whether control or combo, and it also has almost every single form of disruption that's available. It can destroy cards, it can banish cards, it has targeting effects, it has non-targeting effects. Its monsters are gigantic so they can attack over things in battle, and they also have powerful spell and trap cards that act as removal on top of that. Some of the most important cards in the blue-eye strategy are going to be True Light, which is the follow-up, consistency, and kind of the heart of the deck. There's Maiden of White, which activates True Light directly from the deck or hand on your first turn. Blue-Eye Spirit Dragon is a common boss monster for the strategy. Primite Drill Beam is an incredibly powerful negate and a banish, and of course there's also the original Blue Eyes White Dragon, which is definitely needed to play the deck. Blue Eyes and my #1 deck are actually my inspiration when it came to making this video in the first place. I believe that for beginners, Blue Eyes and my #1 deck are actually a cut above all the others I've mentioned so far. But before I get to my #1, I have a few decks I want to shout out. First up is Trap Tricks. It's a trap-based deck that plays very control style of game and is still a lot of fun. Orcust is a graveyard-focused deck that is very interactive on both players' turn, and it's also getting new support pretty soon. Sword Soul Tenyi is a true combo deck that tries to build an unbreakable board, but it does so in a very fair way, and it also uses multiple different ways to stop the opponent, from spell and trap cards to banishing to negates as well. Exodia Millennium is an OTK deck that doesn't need to OTK to win the game, because it has a very solid going first turn too. And Voiceless Voice is a ritual deck that uses almost every single kind of mechanic in the game to a very simplified way. Any of these 5 decks are all really solid, but they don't make it into my top 5. And finally, our #1 Yu-Gi-Oh deck for beginners is none other than Fire King. Now, I love Fire King. I've been playing the deck on and off since the release of the new structure deck back in 2023, and it is just such a fun time. The deck revolves around the field spell Fire King Island, and I guess the lore is like, all these monsters and creatures come from the Fire King Island, and as they get destroyed, they get extra bits of advantage and revive themselves back as well. The deck has such a unique playstyle and really is able to extend past so many other decks, and all of its interruption is super layered, and you have a lot of control about when you want to set up these interruptions, both on your turn and on your opponent's. It's also able to access their interruptions from pretty much anywhere. You can access them from anywhere on the field, from the graveyard of course, from the hand pretty easily, and even from the deck. Some of the most important cards for the deck are going to be, of course, Fire King Island, which searches for cards and destroys others to trigger powerful effects. Sacred Fire King Garunix is easily the best card in the deck. It constantly summons itself back out and destroys your Fire Kings from anywhere. Fire King High Avatar Kirin can destroy your cards when your opponent least expects it and allows you to trigger powerful effects. There's also Garunix Eternity, Hyang of the Fire King, which can be summoned on your opponent's turn and destroy all other monsters on the field. And because the deck is a primarily fire strategy, it can use a ton of really powerful fire support cards, like for example Promethean Princess, Bestower of Flames. I have so much love for this deck because at its core it's so incredibly simple. Just pop a fire, gain advantage. But when you keep playing, you're going to learn all these little extra interactions that you're only going to learn if you play more games. On top of that, all the cards came in a structure deck basically, so it's incredibly cheap as well. It is definitely, in my opinion, the best deck a new player can pick up if they want to start playing Yu-Gi-Oh! But there you have it, that's my top 5 Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks for beginners, plus a few extra as well. Now, if you're a new player, let me know down in the comments what deck you plan to pick up, or if you have any questions. And if you're an experienced player, comment down below what other great options you have for beginner players too. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We are so close to 17,000 subscribers at the time of recording, so I really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.